Alright, so hey everyone. Today I want to share the Deadzone and Curve galleries I've created. On YouTube I've tried to show a few games, but some games I can't record or just don't own the game anymore. So these galleries should allow you to, if I've played it and tested it, find a game that I'm not able to make a video for. Most of this video is just going to be me talking about potential error and inaccuracies with the graphs to possible current versions of any game. So all the links are in the description, so you can take those at your leisure. But to describe some of the things when looking at these galleries, you can see here, this is for Agony. These are in alphabetical order to the best of my ability. I've probably mislabeled a couple of these. But Agony, this is the camera Deadzone. I started out testing exclusively the camera or right stick Deadzones for games, but I've since started to test movement, and I label those ones appropriately. These are much older graphs, and if you see any that are unlabeled, you can just assume that they're camera Deadzones. I try to label movement, but also if there's a distinction in ADS or zoom Deadzones versus hipfire. Of course, there's error in these tests. It's generally kind of small, but for example, Agony, you can see here all these tests are based off of dot graphs that I make. I test points, and when I see movement, and I plot those down and then draw into the final graphs. So for Agony, I started seeing movement at 26% off the axes, and that pretty much means that the Deadzone is probably 25%. The reason why I didn't draw the Deadzone at 25% is because some games use decimal percents, so like it could be 25.8%. So you wouldn't see movement until that point anyway. And if I test, when I do these tests, I test in full percent increments. So 1%, 2%, 3%. And that adds a bit of an accuracy too, because if the Deadzone, say, was 25%, and I tested that point, nothing would happen because it's right on the Deadzone. And then next would be 26%. So if it was 25%, there would be a hair of movement. But I just draw, connect the dots basically, because some games have these variable percent increments, and it's safer in my mind just to connect the dots, even if it adds a percent or two of inaccuracy. For rounded square kind of shapes, you can actually better see the level of precision. For example, with this here, I would have tested 82 and saw movement, but 81 didn't. But as I test the diagonal threshold, you actually see you can actually get a bit more precision with these values. So I picked the slowest value or smallest value and get a better idea of the accurate threshold through that. And with circular Deadzones, you can see that a bit too. Like you can see that this value is a hair above what I could test, and I just picked the lowest value to that. So inaccuracy can come from that, but it can also come from really weird Deadzone shapes. Let's take Anarchy Reigns, very fitting name for this Deadzone. So you see here, I drew an approximation through this. At this point there was movement, but I drew the Deadzone slightly larger, and at this point there was movement, but I drew it slightly smaller here. I make the best approximations I can, but some of these Deadzones are really funky, and yeah, I just do the best I can with this. So for example, Assassin's Creed Odyssey has a pretty weird Icarus one. So here too, I drew the Deadzone slightly smaller here and slightly larger here. This was just the best approximation I could make. The next thing is some of these, of course, are outdated. I test the game at a certain point and then update it, but some games I don't follow up with, and they could be updated outside my control. So Warframe is one of these games, and you'll actually see, oops, W is lower. So Warframe, you could see when I originally tested this is the camera dead zone. It used to be a square dead zone, but they've updated it since then and changed it to a circular dead zone with restricted diagonal movement. And at the time, there was this kind of weird acceleration threshold, but this too is outdated. I don't have all of these marked, but if you see multiple of the same game in a row, that means they're updates of each other, and I'm just keeping them as an interesting progression of the controls. I haven't updated Warframe 1 that I need to upgrade. That keeps they did add dead zone options. They have a perfectly circular acceleration threshold and options to control the um, axis lines. Something I don't have is currently is Red Dead Redemption, for example. Let's see. Let's keep going. Yep, Red Dead Redemption. When I originally tested it, there was some pretty obviously restricted diagonal movement, which had been removed the next time I played it. I just forgot to update it. So I try to, I'll try to add these as I can. This is again the camera. I haven't didn't test the movement at this point. Um, so some of these things might be outdated. So if you want to call me on this, go ahead. Some of these things might be old information. So that aside, moving to actually we'll show Rainbow Six Siege. That is something that's been requested a few times, and I can do that right now. So Rainbow Six Siege, I don't own this game. I've just been leeching off some free play weekends to do tests and stuff. So the dead zones in Rainbow Six Siege are inaccurate to the option value. So at 5%, the camera is about 10%, and the movement dead zone is about 15%. So they're both wrong. The movement is just larger, and they scale weird. So at 50%, the camera dead zone gets more accurate. It's still above 50%, but it's more accurate than it was at the smallest value, and that's the same here as well. You can see that it's about 55% for the movement. And as far as the sprint threshold, you have to move your stick within this range to be allowed to sprint. And once you're sprinting, you can pull back on the stick, and until you move outside of this angular region, you're allowed to keep sprinting. There's an acceleration jump once you move outside of this circular region, and if you move outside this black bar, it gets stronger. This only applies to the classic control rotation, which I'll show in a bit. But so that covers Rainbow Six Siege. But to cover the acceleration curves, again, there is some inaccuracy in these tests based on the rotation, and sometimes the frames don't align perfectly on the exact same reference position. But I try to do multiple rotations just to make that error, minimize that error. These curves are also ignoring the dead zone. Some of these tests are made with a 0% dead zone, so these Call of Duty tests are accurate. The inaccuracy that comes from that is, for example, from Destroy All Humans. This game used like a 27% dead zone, so the actual curve actually starts like here and then moves slower and then spikes up here and builds up. By stretching it out like this, I risk moving this acceleration threshold. It's possible that this stays static and the rest of the stuff is the same, but it could also shift. For example, we know that Halo does this. In the Master Chief Collection, we have dead zone options, so I can accurately test that at 0%, and you can see that the acceleration jump occurs here. But in the original game and in MCC at the original dead zones at 26%, acceleration would actually start at 90. So this is a whole part of the curve that does scale, shrink, and expand with the dead zone size. But I should add that error just to make that clear. So these are all ignoring the dead zone size, with the exception of the current Quake tests. The curve is wildly irregular at different dead zone sizes, so there is no way to make this consistent. So I just left it as is until it becomes more predictable. With the launch version, I tested this at the default Deadzone. I don't know if it's as inconsistent with Deadzone size as it was previously, since Deadzone options were just added with this update. So this is what I had gotten for the default and stretched this out accordingly. So a very subtle kind of S-curve. Rainbow Six Siege. So we have, well, actually that didn't zoom in at all. So we have the classic rotation, which is actually this S-curve, and then it ramps up dramatically at the end. And then I did scale this a bit. The minimum Deadzone is like 10%. So it did stretch it out. This threshold may scale with it, may not. But with the updated rotation, this was changed just to a quadratic curve. The difference, though, is the updated rotation has a bit of aim smoothing, and the classic control rotation doesn't seem to. So you have a more predictable curve without this jump in acceleration, but you have aim smoothing with it. So that's not too great. But anyway, that's enough rambling. So there are errors in these tests. I try to minimize it as much as possible, but that's just something to be aware of. And of course, some tests will become outdated as games are updated. So the links are in the description, and these are updated as I play more games and stuff like that. Some of these graphs will be replaced as I update them. I've been trying to update some of the previous tests with the movement Deadzones. So, like for example, if I go back to retest Agony, I'll delete this graph and put an updated graph with separate movement and camera aiming Deadzone options. So, if you plan to use these things, sorry if that breaks links down the road. I'm just going to try to keep them up to date like that. But anyway, that's about it. Hopefully these are helpful to you, and that covers it. So thanks for watching, and everyone, have a good rest of your day.